Thank you for that. So for the sermon today, I am going to start with the metaphorical accounting rock. For context, I've been working now in nonprofit accounting for the last 4 years, and as an accounting specialist at the organization 1 in 10 for the last year. With that context, I have learned that the word most associated with the field of accounting is boring. And now I'm not disputing that characterization entirely, but I do think it's missing something if that's sort of the end of the conversation and we just call it there. It's boring and that's done. Maybe in part because I have been sitting with the rock, also known as doing my job. And in doing so, I got more curious about it. I also started to get a little suspicious, particularly at one point when I reframed boring as neutral or normal. So just that little reframing made me more suspicious that there might be some power or something hiding under that facade of normalcy. So I thought, what happens if we start poking the rock? And by poking the rock in a non-metaphorical way, I mean Googling social justice and accounting together. And just from the get-go, there are some scorpions hiding under the rock. So lift them up, scorpions or other bad things, if you happen to love scorpions, there is something hiding there. So just to dive right in, the book, Accounting for Slavery, Masters in Management by Caitlin Rosenthal, is about the accounting practices used by British slave owners in Jamaica and American slave owners in the American South. So that included things like standardized accounting booklets that were sold to different plantations, counting inventory, otherwise known as people, and owners actually depreciating the value of their slaves over time, or older slaves over time. A more modern day example that came up was from the 2015 article, Accounting as an Instrument of Social Justice by Teresa F. Henry, Althar Martuza, and Renee E. Weiss, which talks about the recent spate of large-scale corporate financial reporting failures, such as the subprime mortgage crisis of 2008 and the accounting scandals faced by corporations like Enron, WorldCom, and Tyco, illustrates significant corporate malfeasance that was not prevented by corporate governance or market monitoring mechanisms. So there, and a little bit later, they're talking about financial officers and workers who knowingly helped create these crises that devastated people's lives by misrepresenting their company's financials or misrepresenting the risk of investments they were selling and encouraging others to make. The kind of headliner is accounting can be used for unethical ends and in unethical systems. And that while it can be boring, like those day-to-day things are part of what create those systems and make them a reality. That said, as much as a rock can be used to hit somebody, it can also be used to pound flour or chilies to make food that helps nourish the community. And so that is actually more my own experience with accounting. I mentioned at the top, I'm in nonprofit accounting. So in my work, I've helped fund Meals on Wheels for elderly and disabled folks, and paid rent for folks who need help. In my current job, I'm helping create and maintain the infrastructure that supports the growth and lives of LGBTQ+ youth and young adults. Working in nonprofit accounting has actually been a huge affirmation of my belief that we need different people doing different things to help create a better world. At one point in my life, I think I really internalized this idea that there was only one way of doing social justice, and I was not very good at it. So finding something that I'm good at, that is genuinely needed, and that works for social justice all together was relieving, and again, affirming that there's many, many ways to help build for a better world. So, getting off that soapbox, coming back to the rock. Another layer from looking at the rock and poking the rock and checking under the rock is asking what the rock is made of, what the actual ness of it is. So in my job, I do a lot of asking the question, do these two columns of numbers add up to be the same thing? And I will say, I really love the neatness of that answer. They either add up and they're the same number, and that's great, or they don't, and then there's always an answer for why. Genuinely, one of the things I really enjoy about accounting. But sometimes the question, do these two sums add up to the same number, is not the right question. So one of the things I was thinking about as an example is if you have a bunch of pieces, you've tracked all of the valuations of the lumber that you've sold and all the revenue that you've gotten, and those two numbers should be the same. And if you're just focused on whether it's the same, it misses this question of what the value of the lumber is. So just focusing on that one price point, and then the lumber it comes from, and then the tree that came from, the question of value starts to become a little washier for me when I get to the tree. Because is a tree just the sum of all the lumber it produces, all the things that can be sold from it? And in a lot of our systems, our current systems, the answer is yes, that is the value of that tree. But the birds and the squirrels that live in that tree, that make it their home, might have a different perspective on what the value of that tree is. There also might be a different value we see if we think about the way that tree interacts with its local and global ecosystems. So Dana Ramey Berry speaks to these different layers of value on a more human level in her book, The Price for Their Pound of Flesh, The Value of the Enslaved from Womb to Grave in the Building of a Nation. She writes, enslaved people were valued in life and in death, but because they were people and property, multiple sets of values encompassed them and were placed on their bodies. Value here is used as a noun, a verb, and an adjective. It is active, passive, subjective, and reflexive. It is rooted in modes or kinds of valuing and requires an assessment of feelings. The first value signifies an internal quality. I call this an internal or soul value. It is an intangible value that defied monetization, yet spoke to the spirit and soul of who they were as human beings. It represented the self-worth of enslaved people. End quote. So, here's the issue. Part of the way some of these accounting techniques works is to make something complicated and messy and beautiful and complex and reduce that thing to make it relatively simple. A genuine question I had, in sitting with my rock and thinking this through, is that process inherently a bad process of taking something complex and making it into this simple little thing? And honestly, the answer I came to was no. So a positive example of that is something like COVID or disease tracking, where there's these beautiful, complex human beings, but really the one piece of information we need to know is, are they COVID positive? Do they have that disease? In part, because then we take that piece of information and add it up to a bunch of others so we can help keep everybody safer. I think my rock metaphor is perhaps another example of taking a complex idea and making it a little bit simpler. So rather than the idea of that flattening being bad, my takeaway is just to recognize it as a thing. To take a price and not think that's just an objective reality, but to recognize that somebody did that thing where they took something complex and made something simpler from it. And that by doing that, that is an exercise of power that is deeply rooted in social and cultural values. And doing it is a process that carries an ethical and moral implication because of the impact it can have on people's lives. In a normal day for me, the question of whether those two sums add up to the same amount or what these two numbers add to is generally actually the right question. The questions help me do my work, and by doing my work, support an organization that I believe in. But I also want to remind myself, and all of you, to keep spending time with the rock, to poke it and check under it, use it a little, play with it, and learn what it's made of. Because spending time with my own rock has made me dream a little. One day, I would like to be in a world with a fundamentally different economy. In that imagined world, I think of an economy not based on maximizing profit, but rather based on care and well-being for people, creatures, ecosystems, and the world. And that instead of profit, that care is the bottom line, the most essential question, and the ongoing driver of innovation and energy. Now, does that world have accountants? I honestly don't know. But I'm just saying, maybe we try it and we find out. It might be fun.